Virtually every queer parent who is connected to their child through biology, but who also needs to use the gametes of a donor, understands that part of the process is taking implications counseling. But what does that mean? How invasive is it? Is it a judgment process? Will we still be able to follow this pathway if we don't do it right? Today, the guest on my show is Dara Roth Edney, and she is the owner of InformedFertility.ca. We talk about implications counseling, general counseling, and how she goes out of her way to ensure that the people she meets feel safe, supported, heard, and never judged. Welcome to the Becoming Baby Ready podcast, your podcast for queer family planning. My name is Sam, and throughout this podcast, you'll hear me have conversations with professionals who work alongside people who want to start and grow their families, as well as parents of intentionally created families. Everyone I speak to identifies as being part of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. This is your opportunity to learn answers to questions you didn't even know you had. Welcome, everyone. Today, I am excited to be able to introduce you to Dara Roth Edney, who I have had the opportunity to know about for many years, but have actually only met IRL one time, and we had a blast when we did it. But I want to welcome you, Dara. Please tell everyone who you are and about the members of your family. Tell us what you do, all the things.
Wow, that's a lot. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited, and I was equally really excited to meet you. I could be cool. I know what IRL means. So in real life, very exciting. And we did have a lot of fun. That was a great workshop. And so I'm really excited to be doing this with you today and to speak to your audience. So I'm Dara. I'm a social worker and a psychotherapist. I've been practicing for over 20 years, and I have a group practice that is entirely in the area of fertility. My business is called Informed Fertility. I went through infertility and fertility treatment for many, many, many years, and there were many things that were not there for me during my process. And one of the big ones was information, and so that's where the name of my group practice, Informed Fertility, came from. And we work exclusively in the area of fertility support, so supporting people who are going through infertility and loss, supporting people who are accessing fertility treatments because of identity or because of relationship status or because of underlying medical reasons. And so we deal a lot with grief and loss, issues of identity and genetics and carriage and all kinds of things that you can imagine that people are experiencing when they're going through this. And I'm sure some of your questions will hit more specifically on that. But that's a little bit about my practice. And personally, I went through, I would say, from start to end, about 10 years of infertility and fertility treatments.
Wow.
Altogether, I did 6 egg retrievals, and I had one very early loss, but mostly I wasn't getting pregnant. We had a number of diagnoses, including endometriosis, which for any of your listeners who eventually were diagnosed with endo, it's a very long-standing issue before you get that diagnosis and can be really quite difficult. And eventually, ultimately, we had our children through surrogacy. So I have 2 daughters. Both of them were carried by different surrogates. And interestingly enough, in Canada, we have a law, the Assisted Human Reproductive Act, and my daughters were born on either side of the act. So the law changed in between them in terms of what that looked like around compensation. And so different elements were definitely different. And happily, things are much better now in Ontario, certainly, in terms of that. But there was an entire process of parentage and huge amounts of costs involved in being recognized as their parent. And it was a very, very long and difficult process. And but they're here. And so I made it through onto the other side and feel certainly very fortunate in that way.
Before we dive into your work, can I ask you, you born on either side of the law change,
Mm.
and were they traditional surrogacy or gestational surrogacy?
Great question. Both of them are gestational surrogacy,
Okay.
which actually in and of itself doesn't tell us anything about the genetics,
Right.
because gestational surrogacy doesn't necessarily mean my egg. It just means not her egg. But in
Right.
fact, they're both genetically linked to me.
They are. Okay. And that's, I mean, you did what sounds like an unbelievable number of egg retrievals and all of that experience. So I wasn't sure whether or not after all of that you sort of folded everything in and said, forget it. I'm done. All of my parts are finished.
Mm.
Someone else can do it all, which I can fully understand. That's a long
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I talk to people a lot about is the fact that we often hold multiple emotions at the same time.
Hmm.
Um, being able to experience pregnancy was incredibly important to me. What I'm about to say is sort of on one hand easy to say because I had one experience, not the other. I also believe it's my truth, which is that the experience of being pregnant and carrying a pregnancy was more important to me than the genetics. And
Right.
again, I recognize that I can say that now because I lost one and not the other.
Right.
But I remember feeling that way at the time, that not being able to have that experience was incredibly, and still is actually very painful to me. It also, and I I could not imagine life without being a mom. I speak to lots and lots of people in my practice, and many of the people I speak to have all kinds of ambivalent feelings about parenting.
Hmm.
People who start off not being ambivalent, but become ambivalent throughout the challenges of the journey and the cost of the journey.
Yeah.
I was definitely one of those people who, like, when I was 5, if you asked me what I wanted to be, it was a mom. I was a babysitter. I was a camp counselor. I mean, on first dates with people, I would tell people that. And my friends would say, like, stop telling people that, you're scaring them off. And I was like, good, I should scare them off. Like, that's what I want.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted 4 kids. That was very important to me.
Yeah.
So part of me definitely had like I will go to the ends of the earth. There's nothing I will not do for this.
Right.
It also came to a point where I, the idea of doing another embryo transfer, there aren't even words to describe how filled with despair that made me feel.
Yeah.
And for anybody out there who's listening who has been through whatever it is that you've been through that hasn't yet been successful, it just felt like worse than hitting my head against the wall, because the wall was like 30 grand, right? Like it just
Yeah.
um it, I just realized that I just could not do another transfer. And I remember feeling like if the doctor told me that if I did 3 more transfers, it would be successful and I would be able to carry to term, I would not have been able to do it. I could not do another transfer. And
Yeah.
the idea of going to surrogacy was devastating to me. So it was both. The shift was that the idea of surrogacy gave me a little bit of hope,
Hmm.
and the idea of transferring to myself again actually made every bit of my soul feel like it was crumpling up and dying.
Yeah.
It's the only way I can describe it.
Yeah. It's, it is. I mean, the whole story of having to navigate that emotional roller coaster and at the end of the day, being able to become the parent you dreamed of being, but not the path that mentioned grief. I think when we're thinking about fertility, often what we're thinking about when it comes to grief, or what we hear people talk about when it comes to grief, is loss. Whether it's early pregnancy loss, mid pregnancy, late pregnancy, shortly after birth, those kinds of losses. But we don't actually spend as much time as I think we should talking about the grief and the loss that we can navigate ourselves when our body doesn't do what we believed our body was supposed to do. And
Mm,
granting yourself permission to, you know, I speak frequently, and when I'm teaching, I say this all the time. We tend to be such an either or world, and it's all this and or all that, but never a blend of the two. And it's okay to have a cesarean birth and mourn that you didn't have a vaginal birth, and be grateful that you have a happy, healthy baby at the same time. You can feel, we are allowed to feel two, as you said before, multiple feelings and have them both be equally powerfully true.
yeah.
And I
Yeah.
can only just imagine how you
Yeah.
had to navigate that.
Yeah, it's interesting because that I find is one of the things that causes people the most confusion. And the example I always give to people, which makes people laugh when they say like that it just doesn't make sense to them that they can feel those two kind of opposing things.
Mhm.
And I say like, well, if you have a partner that you deeply love, unless you're lying to me, I know for a fact that you don't feel deep love and affection for them every moment of your relationship. If you say that you do, you're lying. So we all know that we can feel anger and resentment and irritation and frustration at
Hmm.
the exact same time that we also deeply love somebody. Like the truth is that we bring multiple feelings all the time into situations.
Yeah.
It's just that these situations are so unique. They are so not replicated in the people around us often. And even, for example, I think specifically around queer communities, for example, where there's often an assumption that there is no infertility. So even if you know people who are doing insemination cycles, even if you know people who are doing donation and surrogacy and IVF, if your journey also includes loss,
Hmm.
reproductive loss, right? Any kind of loss during the process, the physical loss of a baby, of a pregnancy, if it includes not getting pregnant,
Hmm.
your journey is still so different from other people's that it makes it really hard to find language and to feel like things make sense when everything around you just feels so untethered. It makes it really, really hard and complicated.
It does. It absolutely does. When we're talking about queer pregnancies, queer family creation in general, I want to delve into a specific area of focus of the work that you do because it comes up often when I'm having conversations with parents who now have children who have created their families and they have some biologic connection, you generally speaking, or are working on some biologic connection to a child of their own down the road somewhere. And that is implications counseling. And it's probably called other things in different places. Some people have never been told it's implications counseling, that they just get told they have to go for a counseling session.
Or they have to do their psych. That's what I hear all the time. People are told they have to do their psych.
Right. And because they're told they have to do it, and it is a therapy session. And if it's and hopefully it's a good therapy session. That's a whole other avenue we'll delve down a little bit too. But there's a lot of people who feel resentful about it because someone's told they have to do it in order to be able to create a family. At the same time, it's not their fault that they're queer, and so they're missing gametes to be able to create this family. So, can we dive into that a little bit? Because
Absolutely.
I think
Absolutely.
it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I think there's many problems with the way things are set up. One of them is what we just identified around the language of it, around the purpose of it. Lots of people I speak to are not told that this is actually for anybody who's using a donor or a surrogate. So they feel like it's because they're queer or it's because they're single.
Yep.
Lots of times people are told that it's called therapy or it's called a psych eval. And so it is not at all a question that they're going to be feeling anxious, apprehensive, or resentful.
Mm-hmm.
It's an additional cost, sometimes an additional cost they weren't expecting.
Mm-hmm.
For queer people who are linked in with community and who have taken workshops or different kinds of courses through community, they may also feel like, what are you talking about? I'm linked with rainbow families. I'm linked with the 519 or Sherborne or like whatever it is where you live. I've done workshops. Or how about like my wife and I have been talking about this. My husband and I have been talking about this. We've been saving for this. We've been planning for this. We've talked more about it than like my sister who got pregnant accidentally. Like, why do we have to do this, right?
Yeah.
So I actually have, I would say it's not, I'm not surprised when people start off a session with me with any degree of apprehension to even hostility.
Mm-hmm.
I recognize where that's coming from. I recognize, especially from queer communities, where there has been literal gatekeeping over
Mm-hmm.
generations, where people have had their children taken from them. So for me, part of my job is always starting out from the very beginning, being really overt about what it is and what it is not. And so I think a good question if people are trying to figure out, like, is this an appropriate person for me to get my implications counseling from,
Mm-hmm.
is to ask the counselor, what is your goal? Right? Like
Yeah.
when you offer somebody implications counseling, what is your goal in the session?
Yeah. That's
So
important.
my goal is that people leave the session feeling more empowered and more informed. That's always what my goal is. That best case scenario, somebody who says to me, I'm working with my brother is my sperm donor. We've had lots of conversations. There's nothing that you're going to tell me that I haven't thought about. Okay. Best case scenario, we go through the whole session. And at the end, you're like, I am on the right track. I've actually literally never had a session where somebody has said to me, I knew all of that. We've talked about all of that. There was not one new thing.
Right.
That's literally never happened. Sometimes there's many, many new things, and sometimes there's only one or two. Lots of people I speak to are very well informed and are very insightful and very thoughtful about what they want and what they need. The thing that they may not have known, though, is if they're with a clinic, they may not know what happens at a clinic.
Mm.
They may not know what their options are. They may not know what they can say no to.
Mm.
They may not have thought of things that I know about because I've been doing this for more than 20 years. So my goal really is to help people manage their expectations, help people understand different statistics, help people make a plan, help make sure that if people have histories of trauma, particularly around sexual violence, for example, if they're going into a clinic setting, that they are able to advocate for themselves. If there's something about their own body, their own physical experience with medical care, with any kind of invasive testing, that they feel empowered to advocate for themselves, to set up boundaries, that they know their rights.
Mhm.
That if they're working with a donor, with a surrogate, that they understand what those women have to go through to help them,
Mhm.
right? This is not just a transaction. We have a responsibility, I believe, to understand what people are putting their bodies through to help us.
Right.
And that may not be something that you've really thought of. Like if you've had no idea what an egg retrieval is, but you wanting to use somebody's eggs, even if you're buying them from a bank, that was still maybe a 20-year-old girl,
Yeah.
not a grown woman, a 20-year-old girl
Yeah.
who put her body through something to help you, right? If you don't have people in your close life who've experienced pregnancy, and then maybe you're thinking about surrogacy as something like fun that somebody wants to do and she's going to get some money for, maybe you haven't thought a lot about what it's going to be like for her to have progesterone and oil injections in her butt, giant needles in her butt every day for 3 months. Maybe you haven't thought about some of the things that are involved in what she has to do with her body to help you. So, part of my goal with that is helping people see those kinds of things, helping people think about what plan B or C might be if A doesn't work out. And my goal really is by the end that people are more informed, more empowered, have a clear sense of what they want, and are able to go back to other people and talk more about it. Go back to their friend or family member who's going to be a donor and say, hey, let's talk more about this. Be more clear on what they want in a surrogate and in a surrogate relationship. Have a better ability to advocate for themselves at a clinic. Be thinking forward if they live somewhere where there is funding. Somebody who says, oh, our plan is a home insemination. Fantastic. Could you imagine ever doing IVF? Sure, but we're not thinking about that now. Okay, well, in Ontario, there's a 2-year wait list for funding. So
Mhm.
if you can imagine yourself one day doing IVF, then maybe you don't want to think about it now, or maybe you want to get linked in with a clinic, get your name on a funding wait list,
Mhm.
and spend 6 months or a year trying at home. And if it works, amazing. But if it doesn't work, a year from now, you don't have a 2-year wait for your IVF.
Yeah. Yeah.
So really like that is my goal, that people leave the session feeling like excited and hopeful about their journey with more information and more empowered to advocate for what they want.
And I listened to all of what you're saying, and my brain is going a million miles an hour. And I mean, I'm not even thinking about sitting down to chat with you about my own implications counseling journey, because my children are grown and gone, and that's past where I am. But as I think about the conversations that I've had with different people over the last 25 years, when they've been on this pathway, the professionals they've spoken to about the checking the box at the clinic to say they've had their implications counseling, it is almost never as involved as what you've just described. And
Yeah.
so I guess my question is, are you a unicorn?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a couple of things. I think I spend a lot of time with people, And not everybody wants that and not everybody likes that, right? Like
Right.
there's definitely therapists out there that you could see who will do your implications counseling for significantly less money than mine, right? And so somebody who says, why is it that for you, you're telling me if I'm doing egg donation and surrogacy, you're telling me I need two 90-minute appointments at least, and this is the cost of them. But I just spoke to somebody and she said she could see us for an hour and it's like $200. And I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, that's fine. But then that is a check mark. Like, then that's what that's going to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, in answer to your question, there are recommended guidelines for implications counseling for sure.
Hmm.
You can find them through the Canadian Fertility and Andrology Society, through the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, for like all of the different societies out there in Australia and the UK. Like all of us have guidelines. But all of these societies are not regulatory bodies. They're professional societies that give recommendations. The
Right.
truth is that in Canada, at least, you actually don't even have to be a member of the Canadian Fertility and Andrology Society's Canadian Counseling Special Interest Group. You don't even have to be a member to call yourself a fertility counselor. Um, there are clinics that will only work with sort of like I don't want to say but like known names.
Right.
But there are other clinics that won't.
Hmm.
Um, so So part of, I think, people's own due diligence is making sure that you're seeing somebody that fits with what it is that you want,
Right.
right? And so just because somebody is a cheaper option or it's going to be less time, that doesn't mean they're going to get to what it is that you want to get to. Like that is why my sessions take so long,
Hmm.
right? Because I'm not just going through a checklist of things. I'm trying to get to know people. I'm trying to understand, does religion play into it for you?
Hmm.
Like, what is your family of origin? What kind of values are you bringing into this journey? And I don't ask it in that specific way,
Right.
right? But that is helpful for me to understand if somebody grew up in an Orthodox Jewish family or a religious Muslim family, and if they're Muslim, like what sect of Muslim? Because some sects are fine with donations, some are not. Right? If you're Catholic, what family values and messages were you raised with?
Hmm.
Because even if you don't follow it yourself, those those voices are still there and that could make a difference in terms of how things feel for you.
Yeah.
So that's helpful for me to understand.
And when you're asking these questions, and I think I want to go back really quickly to something you said before about it, people calling it a psych eval.
Yeah.
I think it's really important for people to understand that when they see you, you're not placing judgment on whether or not they can or should or would be beneficial to move forward on their fertility journey per se. You're not doing the forms and filling them out and connecting with clinics and saying, "Oh no, that's a big
Yeah.
X on that one." This is not a traditional psych eval, right? Is that
So I want to be careful in my answer because it is different in different places. So in the
okay?
States, for example, the psychologists who are doing, and in the States, it's much more psychologists, and in Canada, actually, interestingly enough, it's much more it's many more social workers who are doing it as opposed to psychologists. So in the States, part of my understanding is that it actually is much more of an evaluation. They're doing all of those PAI, like psychological testing on intended parents. There's a lot of debate about whether or not it should be gatekeeping, but there is a level of that. Like they have to pass that evaluation.
Okay.
My understanding is that it is much more of a heavy on the evaluation for a potential donor or surrogate, but that there still is an evaluation piece of it with intended parents. In Canada, it is less that. We don't do the PAI psychological evaluations. Most of my colleagues are also not looking for sort of a pass fail with intended parents.
Hmm.
I really go on the feeling of like nobody is doing that with straight fertile people. And with adoption, for example, it is a parental capacity, it is a readiness kind of evaluation. But I actually feel very strongly that it should not be with intended parents. There are for sure a few things that might make me feel like something should slow down.
Mm,
I'm happy to say what those kinds of things would be. But the truth is that lots and lots of people who don't have great relationships with each other have babies. Lots of people with mental health concerns have babies. Lots of people who have addiction issues have babies. Lots of people like, so I'm not, when I ask people questions about their mental health, and sometimes people will be nervous to answer that question. And I'm always really transparent that I ask about mental health because this process can be hard. Because studies show that people who go through infertility, which isn't everybody who accesses fertility treatment, but that if that is your story, and I would just interrupt myself to say, to me, infertility is like medical infertility.
mhm.
Um, it is also if you're using and working with a donor and a surrogate, and and your surrogate has a miscarriage, or if your first surrogacy doesn't work and you have to find another one, like maybe there is an infertility, but it's still an infertility journey in that way.
Right.
And the studies show that actually people who have those experiences have higher rates of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders during the pregnancy period and postpartum.
Okay.
If you're going to be taking medication, if you have depression, if you have anxiety, if you have bipolar disorder, and you're taking serious IVF medications that are hormonal and impact your mood, that is important to understand,
Mhm.
right? And I don't need to understand that in order to hinder your ability to move forward. I need to understand that in order to help you access the services and the things that you might need in order to highlight that for your doctor, your medical team, so they can talk to you more in depth
Mhm.
about the medications. So you know the difference between what you should expect from IVF medication versus what is actually not okay, right? Like those are all things that are important, supports during pregnancy, supports afterwards. So I'm asking those questions for that reason, not to say, oh, you had an eating disorder? No, you can't move forward. Like you're taking an antidepressant? No, this isn't for you. No, no, it's not that at all.
I think that that's really important because even here in Canada, when we're told we have to see someone to check that box, then we become afraid that someone outside of the dynamics of who we are as an individual and potentially as a couple, someone else may think we're not qualified to become
Absolutely.
a parent, and that's
Yeah.
we're already missing a gamete, and now so we're already relying on someone else's
Yeah.
outside
Of
support.
course. I mean, look, I go on the assumption that most people in the world are not qualified to become parents. My God. Right? So that's where I think the idea of being able to say to the person whose name you were given, if your clinic or your agency gave you the name of somebody and said, this is the person to see, to send them a message and to say, what is your goal?
Mhm.
When you do implications counseling for somebody, what is your goal? And for me, again, I'm like, I think of this as a psychoeducational consult, like educational, like that is a
Mhm.
big piece of it. And so, if somebody's answer is, the goal is to make sure you're ready to move forward, right? That's then, oh, then you could ask, okay, what does that mean? Like,
Mhm.
what would you need to see for that? Like, so I think that's a reasonable question to try and understand what that person is looking for.
Hold on for just a moment. We'll be right back.
This episode is proudly sponsored by Limitless Slides, the only performance slide built for mindset, comfort, and recovery. As you know, being two moms, we're always on our feet. Limitless Slides helps us stay grounded in who we are while we're embracing our comfort. They're our daily reset, a reminder of our worth, and what we're grateful for. Grab your own pair at limitlessslides.com and take 30% off with the code 2MOMEDIT.
Would they give it, do you think? Would they tell you what they're looking for? Like if they're thinking that they
Yeah, if they don't, then they're not the right person for you. Like one of the things I always say when I start my session, because of the apprehension people feel, and it's not just queer people, like a straight couple who's been through years of fertility treatment, who are just like, I know exactly what to expect. I've been through a million egg retrievals and transfers. I just need to buy some eggs and move forward. Why do I need to speak to you? Like I speak to all kinds of hostile people. Like um, but I say from the beginning, like this is what it's for. My goal, my hope is by the end that you feel more empowered and more informed. If I ask you a question and you want to know why I'm asking it, ask me.
Mhm.
Like there is nothing here that is not transparent. So any question I ask you, I have a reason for asking it, and you can just ask me before you answer it. Just ask me why you need to know that question.
Yeah. Yeah. That's clarification. If nothing else, you're just clarifying what's being asked of you so that you can answer to the best of your abilities. But you're allowed to know. Yeah, that makes sense. You're allowed to know why.
Yeah, and the same way, and I know this is very different. Like I know a lot of other counselors do not do this, so maybe I am a unicorn.
Yeah.
But I send people a copy of their report. And there should be nothing in any of my reports that somebody is surprised to see. So, if, for example, somebody has incredibly high anxiety that does not seem to be treated. And in talking to them, when I talk to them about some of the treatment, they break down, they start hyperventilating, they're like clearly and expressing themselves that they're worried about their own ability to cope, then I might say to them, okay, what would that look like for you if you spoke to your doctor about some psychotropic medication, if we did a bit more therapy to get you more used to it, like how would you feel about that? What would that look like if instead of doing IVF next month, we looked at slowing that down for a little bit? Like that would not just be in a report. Like I would have talked to them about that beforehand. And then if it is in the report that that is something that should be considered,
Mhm.
it will not come as a surprise to a person. And like I said, I send people a copy of the report.
Yeah. No, and I think that that's invaluable because you're doing it as a full session, not just to tick a box, but to give them the education and the sort of informational opportunities to learn so that they can make the best decisions for themselves and their family. But you can only hear so much, right? When you're in those conversations, when you're speaking to, I mean, it could be anyone that you're speaking to who's in a role like that. I go to my family doc to ask her about this, and this, and by the third thing she's talking to me, and it's kind of just sort of mumbled in my ear because I'm still processing the first 2 points. So to get a report back where you can actually read it and see what's been said gives you the opportunity to truly process the
Yeah.
experience that they've had.
Absolutely. And half the report is actually all of the recommendation that would have come up.
Mhm.
Like, so all of the things that we talk about in terms of like what's important to them, what's not important to them, what they're worried about, questions that as part of our discussion, things that maybe if they had questions that I couldn't answer, it's sort of like, okay, then here are things to follow up with the doctor, or here are things that they want from their relationship with their surrogate. And so, yeah, so some of the stuff in the report, the clinic doesn't even care about. Right.
Right.
Like it's really, those are the recommendations for the intended parents, and they get to take that back with them.
So that's the thing. So the clinic needs to know that this has been done. And as we discussed, sometimes some clinics have their own individual or organization that they refer out to. But what if somebody listening to this in Canada or in New Jersey wants to reach out to you because they feel like what you're saying makes sense, and when they called the clinic to ask, what can I expect of the recommended individual, they're not getting the feedback that feels right for them. What can they do? What do they have the right to expect? And when can they say, actually, I want to see Dara. This is
Yeah.
who I want to see. You need to take this
Yeah. So what I
report.
would say is just to sort of like cover your ass. Can I say ass? Just to
Yeah.
kind of, I mean, you could say to your clinic, I have already seen her. Is that a problem? Like then you sort of see, but like, look, I'm a member of the Canadian Fertility and Andrology Society. I'm a member of the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. A lot of the clinics in the States require somebody to be a member of ASRM. And part of the mental health professional group of ASRM. It helps them know that they're dealing with somebody who is properly trained, not just as a mental health professional, but specifically in the area of reproduction, which I am. I mean, I have never in all my years of doing this had a clinic or an agency say that they wouldn't accept me. I've had sometimes clinics say to people, no, you have to see our person. And then sometimes the person might say like, oh, I have a therapist that I want to see. And they'll be like, no, no, you have to use our in-house. But if they see me and I send the report, it's never not been accepted. So I think, again, if you want to be really sort of make sure, then you could always say, I've already seen this person.
Mhm.
Like, here's her credentials. Are you telling me you're not going to accept this?
Yeah.
The only thing I would say would be different, again, is in the States, if your clinic requires the PIA, I don't do that. We don't
Right.
do that in Canada. And so I have had, for example, a few scenarios with different clinics in the States, because I've worked with lots of clinics in the States where they've said that that's required. And then I send a message saying, like, we don't do that in Canada. And actually, they've been like, oh, okay.
And so
So
they still accept it anyway.
they've still accepted it. Yeah. Yeah. I've sent reports to Vegas, to San Diego, to Shady Grove that does a ton of egg donation and surrogacy. Like, it's never been a problem. But again, I'm based in Canada, and so I certainly want to be clear that if somebody is not, that they'd want to check that.
Because you want to go with somebody that you feel like you can talk to, that you feel like you have some kind of a relationship with. If if what you have to do is to tick this box, then why not tick this box with someone who you can learn from and you can have them open your eyes. You've mentioned IPs and surrogates, donors. Do you meet with everybody all together? Do you meet with them separately? How does all of that work?
Yeah, great question. So there's a difference between what happens mostly and what is best practice. So best practice for sure is intended parents meeting together, surrogate, and if surrogate has a partner, meeting together, and then everybody meeting all together. With donation, intended parents on their own, like not on their own separately, but if it's a couple together.
Mhm.
And then if it's a designated donor, meaning if it's a donor who's donating through an agency, I don't meet with her partner. But if it's a donor who's a known person, either a sperm donor, egg donor, embryo donor, meeting with them and then meeting with everybody together. That is absolutely by far best practice. It is not typically done in Canada. And unfortunately, because of the cost of everything involved, people are really hesitant to spend more money, which
Right.
I understand. I also sort of feel a little bit like my costs are like such a drop in the bucket compared to like the costs at the clinic and the lawyers, but I understand. Believe me, after all those years of
Sure.
IVF and surrogacy, I am very sensitive to the cost of things. There are a few clinics that insist on those joint sessions. So certainly in the clinics that I work with in Canada, the clinics that require it, then that's how it happens. The other clinics will leave it to me, meaning if I meet with intended parents and then I meet with, let's say, surrogate and partner, and I see a concern, and I feel like it would be important for everybody to meet together to work through some of the real discrepancies I'm seeing before it moves forward, then all the clinics like support that in the sense of like, oh, we're not telling you you have to do this. Dara's telling you you have to do this. But certainly as part of people's consent forms, I always make that clear. Like, this is the idea is that this could be just one session. If we need more time, it could be two sessions. And if there are discrepancies between what you're saying and what your donor is saying, or what you're saying and what your surrogate is saying, then the recommendation would be a joint session. Because again, the goal is that everything moves forward with openness and transparency and everybody on the same page, or that if everything is going to fall apart, you don't want it to fall apart when your surrogate is pregnant. You want it to fall apart way before you get to that point.
But that brings up another question. When do they see you in this whole planning circle and experience? I think we wake up and we're like, okay, we're in. We've decided we're in. We've been saving the money. Now we're in. We have to find a clinic because we need gametes. We need somebody to help us. When in the whole cycle of all of everything that happens, do they give you a call and say, "So, could you see me on Tuesday?"
Yeah. So I would say that when I'm dealing with third party, meaning donation or surrogacy, there's two kind of appointments. So one is general counseling. So that would be somebody who knows that they want to do this, but they're not sure if they want to work with a donor they know, or an agency, or they're not sure if they want to work with a surrogate they know or an agency, or they're not sure whose gametes within a couple to use, or they're not, or they have no idea what clinic they should go to, or they want some advice on agencies, or like that, those sort of like big questions. That's just general counseling. And that would be a general counseling where really they're just asking questions and I'm answering questions. I'm just like giving some guidance and maybe a bit of a framework for how they could move forward. I would be giving them, for example, names of fertility lawyers and names of different agencies and clinics, and sort of like, here are pros and cons, and here are like things that you should know. If you're this kind of personality, this might be a good fit for you, or like that kind of thing.
Right.
Implications counseling, the more formal one, which comes with that report, is really best when people have a sense really of what they want, but haven't yet finalized anything. So for me, like, worst case scenario is when people are like, we have our donor, we have our surrogate, we've signed all the contracts, everybody has started medication, and we need to do implications counseling because our egg retrieval is next week and the surrogate's transfer is next month. And I'm like, okay, well, then there's literally no point. Like, half of what we're talking about is actually for you to take back to all these people and figure out if this is a good fit. So ideally, it's before you've bought your sperm, before you've signed contracts with a surrogate or a donor, like it, but you know that that's what you're doing. So somebody who comes forward, who partway through the session, it's clear that they're actually not sure if they want their sister to be their egg donor, or if they want to use frozen eggs, or if they want to go through an agency. I can't do all that in one implications counseling.
Right.
And that happens, and it's not a problem. We just then convert the implications counseling to general counseling.
Yeah.
The report goes as a credit on their account. We figure out which path they want, and then we talk about that.
Yeah.
So I would say it's that sweet spot where like you have a sense of what you want, but things have not yet been finalized.
All right. That's good to know. What is the transition rate in terms of somebody comes to find out from you that general counseling, and now they're like, actually, you're a great person to talk to through all this, so I want to do ongoing therapy with you, and in their implications counseling because you gave me all the information I needed to start us on our path. Now I'm just moving down, and can you just be my lifelong therapist?
Yeah.
Does that happen a lot?
Yeah, it happens all of the time. Yeah, all the time. I'd say probably 70% of the people that I see for either, it goes both ways, like a percentage of people that I see for general counseling who will end up needing implications counseling, and probably 70, if not more, percent of people who I see for implications counseling will then continue to see me for just general counseling. And sometimes it's really like sort of one-offs, like they don't see me regularly, as in like every week or every other week, but they'll see me kind of strategically around when things are happening or when things go poorly. And other people like the idea of seeing me fairly regularly. Sometimes I do somebody's implications counseling and then I don't hear from them until their surrogate is pregnant. And then they're like, you saw me 2 years ago, she's pregnant, we're sort of freaking out. All of these things are happening with our families and our friends. And now there's like this big problem and we want support, and then there's that or other kinds of things. And I see lots of people also through postpartum, which is not just for people who give birth.
Yep.
Anybody, regardless of gender, who becomes a parent can struggle with postpartum after pregnancy or perinatal mood disorder during pregnancy. And so I speak to lots of people afterwards and even through parenting, because lots of times once people have gotten to, it's not so easy to build a therapeutic relationship.
Yeah.
And so there's definitely lots of people that I see who are no longer in the thick of fertility, but they're like, well, now that we've dealt with that, maybe you can help me with my mom.
That's right.
Yeah, so I mean, the people come to me through the lens of fertility, but obviously, I'm a trained mental health professional, and so I can offer support in any of the ways that people might want at any point in the journey.
Right. And because it can be, you hear everybody say it can be so difficult to find a therapist that you can actually feel comfortable and safe to talk about the things that you need to talk about. There's no point going to your therapy sessions and lying because nobody's coming out of that further ahead.
Yeah, and look, the truth is that there is, to me, I feel really strongly that somebody's clinical ability is somebody's personality is just as important as their clinical ability.
Mhm.
And that if somebody feels like they're not a good fit for me, sure, like some little part of me is like, what do you mean? I'm so great. But actually, most of me is like, that's no problem. I have two associates that work with me. And the truth is that there's lots of people out there. Like, I think I'm really great at my job. I have a lot of value to offer. I'm also not the right fit for everybody. I'm
Right.
just not, and not everybody is. And you have to be comfortable with the person that you're speaking with. And that's more than just like your values. It's more than just like, oh, I feel this way about single parents or about queer parents or about like, or I believe this about surrogacy. Like somebody could have the same values as you,
Hmm.
but it's not such a great fit.
Right.
I'll just tell you this little story. When I was going through fertility treatments, I was a mess and I was looking for a therapist. And I found three people that I wanted to check out. And I made an appointment with all of them. And one of them, like her resume looked amazing and she sounded great on the phone. And I walked into her office. I'm never going to forget it. It like is one of my like trauma hilarious moments of fertility where all the wallpaper and the chairs were all that chintz, like flower, like the wallpaper
Oh.
and the chairs on her wall, on all four walls, up near the ceiling was a shelf, and the shelf was lined with porcelain dolls.
Oh.
The entire room. There must have been like 100 of them. There was not an empty spot on the wall up near that shelf. The whole circular part of the room.
Mm.
I didn't even stay for the session. I was like, here's your money. This is not going to be a good fit. I was like, am I in a horror movie? What is happening here? And
Yes.
it's true that she might have been a great therapist, really. I mean,
Yeah.
I actually don't think she could have been because that's weird.
Yeah.
But maybe she was.
Yep.
But there was absolutely no way, there was no way that I could have trusted her or felt comfortable in her because that room made me uncomfortable.
Yep.
Right? Like you have to feel comfortable with the person that you're trusting all of your innermost thoughts and feelings with.
Yeah.
And so nobody should take that as a personal affront. If you're not a good fit, you're not a good fit. That's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. No, that's so true. And I've seen different therapists for different things over the years, and some have been great fits and others been you know.
Yeah.
No, but
And
thank
look,
you.
sometimes somebody's not a good fit because they're a bad therapist. But oftentimes somebody's a great therapist. They're just not a great fit for you. Just like human beings and friends and partners.
Yeah.
Somebody could be a great person. That doesn't mean you're going to spend the rest of your life with them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very true. That's very, very true. If someone was to see you in Canada, you are a registered therapist so that they can submit to their insurance if they have third-party insurance. Is that right?
Yeah, so I'm a registered social worker and a psychotherapist registered through the College of Social Workers and Social Service Workers. So if
Okay.
somebody has coverage for social work, if somebody has coverage for a psychotherapist, then I'm covered under their insurance.
What about in the US?
So in the US, I highly doubt I'd be covered. Most people's insurance doesn't necessarily cover them for out of the area in which they live. And in the States, it's very complicated with how that
Right.
works, right? So I would suggest people do two things. One is like find out what their insurance covers.
Right.
Um, Sometimes people, when they have a discussion with their insurance company and can make it clear that it's a specialized service, I've like filled out forms for different insurance companies where they were told initially like they wouldn't be covered for my services. But then when the person explained that I was like a specialty therapist, then if I fill out these forms and then it gets covered. And also depending on what happens in terms of taxes, my services are also tax deductible. So sometimes
Okay.
people find that there's different ways of accessing funds for my services, whether it's through insurance or through tax deductions.
Yeah. Because, as you said, it may be a small drop in the bucket of fees that people are expected to pay, but it's
Still a drop.
still a drop. And so if they
Yeah.
can get compensated back or reimbursed rather.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also there's a difference between like a one-off session,
Mhm.
which again, like it's still a drop. Like it's not nothing. And if somebody is interested in ongoing therapy, like that adds up.
Sure.
It definitely adds up. So absolutely.
Do you do all of your sessions virtually, some of them in person? How does it work for somebody in Temiskaming who wants
Yeah.
to meet
Yeah,
you?
so I would say most of my sessions are virtual, but I'm happy to see people in person. Interestingly enough, like before the pandemic, I would say I was probably 30% virtual before the pandemic
Mhm.
and 70% in person. And then obviously pandemic, 100% virtual. And now I'd say 90% of the people I see are happy to do virtual, and some people want in person. And so I meet people in person. One of my associates does entirely virtual.
Okay.
And the other one probably is about 50-50 in person and virtual. So whatever people's needs are, we can manage that.
And everyone that works with you has the same area of focus for their practice. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. And that's because important to feel like if they contact your office and you have a full schedule, especially if they are looking down a timeline kind of a schedule, maybe you don't have space, but one of your associates does, or vice versa. They're.
Yeah, so typically what happens is when people, if they call and they request me, Amanda, who's my amazing, amazing assistant, might say like, Dara doesn't have availability until here, but Blair has availability earlier. What would you prefer? And sometimes people say they want to wait for me, and sometimes they're happy to see Blair. And the nice thing also about the practice is if something happens and there's a crisis, like let's say one of my regular clients has a crisis and calls and she needs to speak to me, and I'm sick or I'm away or there's just literally nothing in my calendar for the next few days, Amanda will say, like, Dara isn't available tomorrow, but obviously it sounds like you need to speak to somebody. Blair has an opening. With your permission, Blair can actually look at your chart, see where things are, and you can see her. And so people actually really often do that. I shouldn't say often because we do our best to fit people in, obviously, when it's a crisis.
Sure.
But it is nice that between the three of us, that there's somebody who, with your permission, can read your chart, see what's been happening, and then like be there for you to be able to offer that support as needed.
Yeah, that is really important. Can you tell people who are listening how they can get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So best way is probably either through my website, so informedfertility.ca. And there you can read my full bio and my associates. You can read all of our bios and see our pictures and like sort of get a sense if one of us is a better fit than the other. And then when you go to the contact us page, it has just like a little drop down. You could say earliest available, or you can pick one of us specifically. And if you want something specific, general counseling or implications counseling, you could make that little note, send it off. Amanda responds within usually a couple of hours. So the website's often the best way because then you can read more about our services. We also have free support groups that people can join. And there's also just the, kind of, I was going to say old-fashioned email, but is that old-fashioned? I don't know. And that's admin@informedfertility.ca.
Nice. Because I ask everybody who comes on to my show when they are a parent what their very favorite part of parenting is. I think that that's where I'd love to take this before we say our goodbyes.
Sure.
What is your very favorite part of being parent to your girls?
I would say that my very favorite part is also the part that I have found the hardest,
Mm,
which is letting go. That is ultimately what parenting is about.
hmm
From like from when they're little to as they grow, it's like letting go at different stages. And it is the hardest part to figure out when you're supposed to let go of what. Like I have found that very challenging. And it is also the most beautiful part is like seeing them become who they are. I love being a mom more and more every year.
Yeah.
Um, because I know them more every year, and every year they are more and more who they are.
hmm
And I find that wonderful and exciting. So there's definitely people who are like, oh, I miss this stage or I miss that stage. And like, it's not that I don't recognize and miss elements of like the sweetness of little kids. It just doesn't compare to me to what it is to see them becoming who they are. Like I find that incredibly beautiful and incredibly exciting.
Yeah.
And I love that part of it.
As a parent with children who are grown adults that are grown and gone, I can relate to what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to take a moment and just say thank you so much for joining us today, explaining the work that you do, but really truly beyond the work that you yourself do, giving some guidance to listeners as to what they can anticipate when it comes to checking that box when they want to create a family. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would say that the checking the box thing is also a really useful thing for people to think about, because if that's the sense they're getting from the clinic and from the therapist or counselor that they've been referred to, if that's what they want, like if that's what you want, then I'm certainly not here to tell you that that's not what you want, but I kind of am saying that's not what you want. Like there's an opportunity here with the right person to get some really great learning to help this be the journey that you want and to help you make decisions in the short term that are going to benefit what you want for your family long term. And so once you're spending the time and once you're spending the money, to really make sure that it's not a checkbox. It shouldn't feel like that. And if it does, then you might be in the wrong direction, because that's not ever what I want people to feel like from a session.
It's not what anybody could ever feel with you. It's too easy to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, the same back to you. And thank you so much for the work that you do.
Well, thank you for saying that. I really love what I do, and I love being able to connect listeners with really wise and wonderful guests like yourself who help empower them and answer their questions so that they can create the families of their dreams. As a queer individual with colonial lineage, I want to first acknowledge the land upon which I live and work. Being from what is now known as Burlington, Ontario, I recognize the original ancestry of these lands as they span from Lake Ontario to the Niagara Escarpment and beyond. These lands are steeped in Indigenous history that benefits my community every day. The territory is mutually covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy, the Ojibwe, and other allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. I would like to acknowledge that the land on which I stand is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. The land dictates everything about our ways of being. Particularly, the land teaches us about fluidity. Concepts of the binary system and heteropatriarchy were imposed by the colonials who were, at the same time, removing children from their homes, families, and all that was familiar to them. These same children were divided by the only two prescribed binaries recognized by the settlers, and they were forced to conform to a performative, gendered falsehood. The land doesn't operate under binary thinking. It is diverse, complex, and unpredictable at times. Rather, the land holds us and all of our remarkable pasts and identities. Every organism and spirit has a purpose. It is from this understanding that I strive to live and grow. Thank you for joining me today on the Becoming Baby Ready podcast. If you have a story that you'd like to share, or you know someone who might, if you're a professional who works in the capacity of helping people start and grow their families, and you identify as being a part of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community yourself, then please don't hesitate to reach out. We always have room for more stories to share, and there's always more learning to do.